Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I just want to do a little update ahead of today's Man United game from some fresh quotes from Ange Postecoglou from his press conference that we held over to till today, which were relating to some of the questions that I asked regarding his captain, Son Heung-min. Um, for context, before I go into what he said, I feel like Sonny this season's been a big talking point about his form, about the team's form, his role in it all. But one of the things that keeps cropping up, and I see quite consistently from pundits, from fans, even when I did an interview with Gus Poyet a little while ago, he mentioned this as well, is how fitting Sonny is to being the captain. There seem to be quite a lot of question marks around his suitability, I suppose, as captain, and people viewing him as a bit of a maybe too nice is the accusation. I'm not saying this is what I think. I'm just saying this is what a lot of people seem to say, and it felt like almost relevant to ask Ange about this because he's the one who obviously named him captain after Harry Kane left, um, and I think whenever teams are going through a difficult period, a lot of things get analysed, and key players' performances and their roles get analysed, and so, like I say, a lot of people seem to be calling into question whether having Sonny as captain is the right thing, given he's not a ranter and a raver. Now, on that point, I think a part of the issue, and this is one of the things I asked at Ange, is that a lot of us have in our minds, particularly if we're of a certain age. So I'm 38, so it's kind of me and a bit older, have kind of Roy Keane in your mind. You have Alan Shearer, I suppose, Tony Adams, maybe later on sort of Steven Gerrard, but those kind of old school skippers who are a lot more vocal than the modern day captain. Very physical, not afraid to rant and rave at referees, opponents, and even their own teammates. And Keane is probably the prime example of that. John Terry, I suppose, similar kind of character. And I don't know whether the modern day captain, you really see that. I can't think of many. I mean, and yet the sort of debate surrounding current players who are given the armband, they're always measured to this yardstick of your Roy Keanes. I mean, Man United, today's opponents, of which obviously Keane represented as captain for many, many years, are a prime example. Bruno Fernandes is constantly being questioned by Keane and other pundits and fans over how suitable he is to being the captain there. And you get the same thing at other clubs as well. And so I thought it was interesting to sort of ask Ange about that, and Sonny generally as being this sort of accusation of nice guy and what he thought. And he said that the world's changed and dressing rooms have changed as well. And even Roy Keane would have to adapt and would find it challenging today. Not saying that he wouldn't be able to adapt because the sort of the real leaders always find a way, but it would be different. And he himself said, "I can't be the same manager as I was 20 years ago." You can't go into dressing rooms and give ultimatums anymore. You can't say essentially it's my way or the highway. You can't say, to quote him, if you don't like it, you're out of here. It's just not possible anymore. The modern day environment is very different now. I guess thinking about that, there's a few different factors behind that. I mean, the modern day player, reflecting society, people are maybe more sensitive or just not won't put up with that kind of treatment as much. Probably a big part of it is player power has increased significantly compared to what it used to be. It's harder for a club to, or rather, it's easier for a club to dispense with a manager who's having problems with players from being that kind of ultimatum approach than all the players themselves, because the players cost so much. Obviously, salaries, cost it would cost to replace them. So I think that's changed a bit, and you can sort of see that with Antonio Conte, who's probably was in one of the most powerful positions at Tottenham, and even he, when he sort of basically torched the players' reputations in that final press conference at Southampton, you only knew it was going to go one way after that. So I just don't know how possible it is, personally, to be that kind of captain in the same way, or at least he's saying, and saying you can't be that same kind of manager. And I get that. I see what he's saying on the front, and he's also, and by extension, it's not as possible to do that kind of captain anymore. It just doesn't go down as well. At least that's his argument. And he said, so what if he's a nice guy? Like, I put it to him about this sort of nice guy narrative. So what if he's a nice guy? What is wrong with being a nice person? Do you have to smack people around, was the quote. He said, I've seen captains, basically the opposite of what this nice guy persona that Sonny apparently has, and they've been poor captains. He said, Sonny is Sonny. I've got no complaints about his leadership. And essentially, he leads by example. He talked about like the enthusiasm Sonny has in training when players come in. Like basically, it's infectious, but also it raises standards. So Sonny will question other players if they're not hitting the same levels as he is in training. Then he'll basically ask why not? Because if I'm doing it, you should be as well. And he said there was many ways to lead. And this is something that Ange sort of talked about before. It's not the first time this has come up, but it felt like it's a narrative, I suppose, about Sonny's suitability to being captain that has come up quite a lot of late. I guess, again, unsurprisingly, given that the form has been difficult, both for him personally and the team. And, you know, just because Ange says this doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Whether Son is still, you know, suitable to it, or if he'd be better off not having the burden of being a captain and the weight of responsibility, maybe one might argue that would help. But on the very point that he's too nice to be it, that basically is Ange's response. And I see that. I see it. I mean, I can't lie and think, you know, when he was named captain, I guess you've got a modern day dressing room with a lot of different nationalities, and he has the respect of all of them. And so that makes him a very fitting candidate for that particular role. And he's the best player in the dressing room, or at least he has been over the last decade or so, and been a crucial player. So on the face of it, he seemed like a really fitting player. But I suppose, you know, he doesn't seem, I guess I'm falling back into that narrative about what kind of captain you're after, but he doesn't seem the most vocal compared to others. And it's not like that kind of captain has completely gone away. Like, it was quite noticeable during lockdown when journalists were lucky enough to still go to games, but obviously there were no fans. And you could really pick up how vocal some players were. And some were quite surprising. Like, I wouldn't have guessed Adam Lallana was as vocal as he is. It doesn't surprise me now he's trying to go down the coaching route. He definitely seems it. Since after hearing that, at first you might think of him as being quite a sort of flary kind of player and not really geared towards that, but he definitely is. But Jordan Henderson, who very much is in that old school mode, you really saw it sort of laid bare during that period of how vocal he was, honestly. When you couldn't, no fans around, you could hear everything they were saying, and he was so vocal throughout. We also had that when I think he was playing for England when I think they were playing Croatia a few years ago when it wasn't COVID, but there were no fans due to Croatian fans being banned, basically, I think because of racism, and that was also very noticeable then. So they are still of them. They're just fewer and further between, I suppose now. And on Son, you know, first of all, when it comes to speaking to the media after bad performances, which you can argue how much does it matter, but it is important to have players front up after bad results. He always does. Yes, maybe sometimes his messaging has been a bit repetitive this season, and fans might be getting tired of hearing him sort of the words he's saying. But look, that's not his fault. That's basically because there've been so many bad results, so many sort of scenarios that keep recurring, that it's hard to know what else to say. It's a bit like Ange talking about the injuries. People get bored of hearing the same thing, but that doesn't mean that they haven't got a point by saying them. And it's not like Son ever like explains away performances. He definitely generally fronts up and says the quite damning words of him and his teammates at times. So I don't think you can criticise him on that front. And then when you hear some of the younger players talk, like remember after the Elfsborg game, where obviously it was a lovely story of the three youngsters scoring their first goal for the club, Dane Scarlett, Demola Ajayi, and obviously Mikey Moore. I mean, all of their interviews, I think, particularly at least Mikey Moore and Demola Ajayi ones with the club media afterwards, were referencing Son and his influence on them all. And the same goes for Brennan Johnson when he's done interviews before this season, how much he regarded him before he even came to the club. So he clearly has the respect to the players. He just isn't that kind of vocal, old school captain. But I guess I come back to my original point. I don't know how much you really can expect that of modern day players. They just seem to have changed a bit. And I guess it's something that is harder to move past when every time you watch matches on TV these days, the analysis is done by those old school guys, whether it be Keane or whoever. I'm not saying they don't deserve to be there, because they've obviously got the fantastic. They speak really well, and it's fascinating insight whenever you hear them. But it often serves as a reminder, and Man United fans will know this more than anyone, of what used to be and what isn't anymore. I suppose, whether it be performance or whether it be that kind of approach to managing teammates, whether it be a captain or as managers. So I don't know. I just thought it was quite interesting, but I suppose we should just talk a little bit about Son while we're on it. I don't think this is obviously a different debate compared to talking about his form this season, unless the weight of responsibility of being captain has affected his form. I'm not sure I can see any evidence of that, but I suppose one might make the case for that. But his suitability captain is a bit of a different debate. But we might as well move on to his form generally this season, because it's almost often with a heavy heart people talk about Son in a critical way. And it's not just because of his army of fans back in South Korea, although they will tell you when they don't like something. Probably we'll have that after this particular video. Because they're so passionate about their icon in their country. And I've been to Seoul with Tottenham, and I've seen firsthand the amazing reception. And look, any fan who goes to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, every time, there's just it's amazing to see how many South Koreans turn up every game to watch their icon. Literally, the game the other day, I forget which one it was, there was a guy sitting just in front of us, in front of the press box, and I think in one of the more expensive seats, who was basically filming it was almost like player cam. Do you remember player cam they used to have when Sky used to have it? Literally just filming Sonny the whole time, giving his own little commentary, which seemed very much like sort of fan commentary, albeit in South Korean, but in terms of I definitely got the emphasis coming through when he missed a chance or if he got into a good position. But anyway, the point being is that he's got an absolutely amazing following, and it's not just from being a good South Korean player, and obviously haven't been an absolute mountain of success stories from Asia generally in the Premier League, but he's genuinely up there as being one of a Tottenham legend, and maybe a Premier League legend. It's got to be up there. I mean, the amount of goals he's scored, he's a centurion. Yes, they haven't won anything, but that's not really a reflection on him. That's Tottenham. But anyway, let's talk about his form a bit this season, because it does feel like he's been through a difficult period and continues to do so. Now, Ange was saying, when he was sort of defending Son to one of these questions, that people can talk about, looking for excuses basically, or reasons to blame. You can talk about his own tactics, or you can talk about Sonny, but really it's down to the injuries, which is obviously something he's talked about a lot. And there's no doubting that the injury crisis that Tottenham have had, particularly over the last few months, which luckily seems to be or fortunately, seems to be easing up now, has had a debilitating effect on the players who are fit, in the sense of what they've been able to, the output they've been able to produce, because they're so knackered, so tired from having so many games in such a short period of time, not being able to rotate at all. And Son's probably an example of that, particularly the creative players who try, their job is to try and make things happen rather than stop things happening. Those are often the ones that obviously get criticised more, but it's arguably just a harder job to do. And when you're tired, even more so. So I do think there is a big part of that that's come into Son's form this season. But having said that, I think a lot of people are of the mindset, and I'm kind of nearing towards it well, that he just isn't quite the same player as he was before. Now, it's not to say he can't recapture the magic, but I remember back in December asking Ange about his form, and he used the example of Mo Salah and how people wrote Salah off last season. And then look at the way he's come back now. I mean, he's unbelievable, Salah, the way he's come back. He's been the player of the season by a long, long way. Been brilliant. And to be fair to him, Liverpool have had a very fit squad. He's played most games, but if he needed a rest, he could easily have it, because Liverpool have had so many fit players, and Son hasn't had that. But in that sort of debate about Son at the time, Ange talked about how the end comes very quickly for players, particularly the sort of quick ones, where suddenly it all collapses very quickly and they go from being a top player and it suddenly is all over. But he really didn't see that with Son. I'm not saying it's quite as dramatic as that, but the form generally this season has suggested a bit of a downturn. And he's turning 33 in the summer. I just think he's got there's a lot to happen to try and get back to the form he showed a few years ago. And I think it's fair, much people won't like that, it's fair to be sceptical if he could actually reach that again. Obviously, he'd be helped if there were fit players and he could have rests when he needed. But it's the fact that I feel like that left wing position for Tottenham in Postecoglou's style is so crucial to the way the whole thing works for Spurs. The right winger, who when Tottenham are at their best is generally Brennan Johnson, is almost like the rapid winger who's there on the end of chances, finishing chances off. When Spurs are at their best, he's more of a finisher. Solanke in the middle is more of a hold the ball up kind of guy. I thought there'd be more sort of cutbacks for him to finish off. Maybe teams are wising up to Spurs' ability on that front. And that's why we've seen less of that. But that role is more an occupier, I think. The right side is more the finisher. Ange has even referenced himself, talking about that right wing in his teams. If he was a young player who had that ability, he'd score bucket loads of goals and would love to play there. The left wing is a bit of a different position. He's more the sort of guy it's on him to make things happen and cut inside and produce that bit of magic, that sort of phrase that Glenn Hoddle loves. And Son historically has been able to do that. He's been a wonderful player, technically brilliant player, great finisher, scores goals out of nowhere, great crosser, beats players, all ends up. But we just haven't seen enough of it this season. And I think there are legitimate question marks over whether he is able to still produce the same ability, produce the same magic. I mean, Aaron Lennon was talking about it the other day on TalkSport and was saying how when he was going through a difficult period, suddenly you have these moments where you can't beat a player, and you sort of wonder, how has this happened, given that it wasn't long ago I was doing it without even thinking. Lennon would be a prime example, and it wasn't just pace. But he said a lot of it is about confidence on that front. It's not just about sort of physical changes, and you can make the case that Sonny's not as quick as he was anymore, but he was making the case about it being mainly about confidence. So maybe it is that, because there are times this season where you thought this is a player that is really struggling with confidence. I mean, prime example, Villa at the weekend. Spurs, getting battered, to be honest, but still only 1-0. He has that prime chance when Moore rolls it into him, and he has to take it. And it's hard to beat Emilio Martinez, and it seems harsh to sort of dig him out on one opportunity. But prime Son, feeling really confident, really fancy him to stick that one away, as he's done many times at Villa Park. So I do think, I suppose to say there are legitimate questions like over Son's form this season. What is it, 10 goals all season in 33 games? 6 in the league. The output is nothing on what it used to be, albeit with all those mitigating factors. And what this video is really about is a hope, I suppose, that he can somehow recapture that form, because for Tottenham to do well and work best in a Postecoglou approach, is that left wing position is massive. And if Son can somehow recapture the form, maybe take a break when some of the players are back and get a bit more rest and recapture the confidence, then that would be absolutely massive, particularly in their pursuit for the Europa League, which is becoming the key factor to this season now. That's what the season hinges on at this point. And he can prove to everyone out there, including myself, as a skeptic, I suppose, of him being able to recapture that magic, that he's still got it and can still be that player. He's obviously had the option on his contract extended by a year. Spurs presumably are looking to keep him in the summer. And he's clearly a very influential player who is respected by his teammates. And no matter what people might think about, as I said from the start of the video, of what a captain is supposed to be, he is a big influence on this dressing room. But I think from his own performances, Spurs really need him to up his game at times to be not only that talisman in terms of a influential leader, but lead by example, which is what his whole leadership characteristic is all about. And if he can do that, starting with Man United today, which he's had some success over many times over in the past, then that could be absolutely massive for Spurs. I'd say generally barring the last two results, which have been really, really disappointing against Villa and Liverpool, obviously, but from his performances, he has really struggled when they sort of needed him most during that period. I actually thought prior to that, the 3 or 4 games before that, he's been one of the more reasons for optimism, I guess, going forward. I feel like he's actually performed quite well. Even in the Leicester game, which they lost and was a horrendous game, his first half performance was actually quite encouraging. So if he can sort of get past what's happening against Liverpool and Villa and build on it from here on in to the rest of the season, then as I say, that could be fundamental to changing his fortunes and the club's fortunes overall. But let me know what you think. Whether you still think he can turn it around, whether you think he makes for a good captain. I'll be intrigued to see if there's any particular feedback from his particular fan base, or whether they understand, generally where I'm coming from on this. I feel like generally he's been an unbelievable player, and I think that the sort of hope is that he can recapture that magic. So fingers crossed he does. Starting from Man United today. Cheers, guys.